Our new message series begins today, and we're calling it Back to Reality. Most of us are back home from summer vacation, where we're back to work, back to school, even back to church. Summer vacations help us to break away from the everyday realities of life. They help us to relax, to renew family relationships, and to renew our own spirits as people. Now it's back to reality, back to the normal routines of life. In these ordinary routine times, how can we renew our spirits, especially when it comes to spiritual matters? Remember, almost a year ago, we started our first message series entitled Steps. We talked about things each of us could do to strengthen our relationship with Christ and with one another. We described them as steps along the journey to discipleship. Let me refresh your memory on what these steps are. S stands for service in ministry and mission. T was about tithing and giving generously. E was about engaging in small groups. P referred to prayer and the celebration of the sacraments. S was about sharing our faith. Now, the primary step in all of these five, the primary step is prayer and the celebration of the sacraments, because participating in this step will lead us on the path towards the other four steps. This is where today's gospel reading comes to life for you and me. It reminds us that we are not alone on this journey that we call life. It reminds us that our spiritual life and energy can be renewed. It tells us that we don't have to live life on our own power. In our gospel, Jesus says, "I am the living bread come down from heaven." The expression living bread stands in contrast to all the other breads consumed. When Jesus talks about his body and blood as living bread, he was talking about his whole self. He was talking about giving his whole life, uniting his whole life with ours, the way he lived and the way he died. And that life, that love of Christ, will never, ever run out. There will always be more than enough to meet our needs. So the question is, what do we do to receive Christ in order to renew our spiritual life? Of course, our first thoughts turn to the sacraments. Last year we talked about how we encounter Christ in the sacraments, especially in the Holy Eucharist. Each week we come to this table. We are not here to do anything, believe it or not. Our purpose in this moment is to have something done to us. Let me repeat that. Our purpose when we come to Eucharist in this moment is to have something done to us. We bow in the presence of Christ in the Eucharist, allowing his love and power to come into our lives and to nourish us and strengthen us and transform us, to change us in some way. We do nothing but receive the gift of Christ that is freely given to us. Another way we are renewed in our spiritual life is through our prayer. Many people think of prayer as begging God to do things for them that God is reluctant to do. I remember I was in residence in Oakland at the cathedral in downtown Oakland, which was the inner city. And every morning Mass at 7 o'clock in the morning, there was a woman who came to Mass. And we allowed, at the weekday Masses, we allowed people to, after the prayers of the faithful, we allowed people to express their own prayers out loud, so everyone could hear and join in that prayer. And this woman every morning would pray that her son would be arrested and that she would win the lottery. Go figure. I went back to the first parish I was in. There was the pastor was an eccentric Monsignor, and I told him about this incident. He says, "Oh, I never allow people to mention their prayers out loud. They might be praying for the demise of the pastor." So, but many people reduce God to the role of a heavenly bellboy whom they call to run their errands. Now, true prayer includes asking, but it never includes begging. Prayer is not trying to change God's mind, but for us to seek God's mind. Let me say that again. Prayer is not trying to change God's mind, but for us to seek God's mind. Our prayer does not change God's will, but helps us understand God's will so that we can grow closer to God and to one another. My father, at the age of 63, was discovered with lung cancer, and it had entered into his liver. And he was terminally ill. And we as a family prayed very hard for his recovery, for his healing. But that's not what he needed at that time. My father was not a weekly attender at church. He was a minimal Catholic that would go on holidays and weddings and funerals and so forth. So what his terminal illness did for him and for all of us too, it was to turn to God and he received the sacrament of reconciliation. He was anointed, and he received Holy Communion. So this disease, his not healing, brought him back to the church. And that's what he needed at that particular time in his life. That's what he needed. He didn't necessarily need healing. He needed his soul to be healed. And that's what Christ did for him. So prayer helps us to understand God's will for us so that we can grow closer to God and to one another. Yes, summer vacation is over, and it's back to reality for all of us. It's time to get back to reality in our spiritual life through our prayer and the sacraments, to receive Christ through our prayer, so we can understand God's will for our journey, to receive Christ as the bread of life in the sacraments. He is the one who nourishes us and strengthens us on the journey of life. Great Christianity is not something to be done. It is something to be received. It is something to be received. Remember the words of Jesus. I am the living bread come down from heaven. Our Lord did not simply call people to follow his way of life. He promised them that he would be the source of energy with which to do that. And that promise holds true for you and for me. All we have to do is to accept the gift that Jesus has to give.